Welcome to Richter House. I'm very excited that today I can introduce Rick Spencer and Dawn Indermuehle. Actually, I would want to pronounce it the German way, which is Indermuehle. We had hosted them a few times before, and about 2 years ago actually was my very first time I ever came to a show at Richter House, and it was Rick Spencer. His program back then was Fremont for Freemen, and I was so entertained and I enjoyed it so much that I started coming here on a regular basis on Sundays. And meanwhile, I'm on the board, and today, first time I'm ever hosting an artist, so I'm very happy that it is Rick Spencer. Today's program will be on songs of World War I. Rick and Dawn develop and present a series of theme-based music and history programs. Like I mentioned before, the other one today will be on World War I. And they try to, sometimes they compose their own vocals, and they try to make the music capture the feeling of the time and resemble this. Their repertoire includes music from the colonial area until today. And I think overall I just want to say enjoy the program. They're very entertaining, very educational, and super enjoyable. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's so good to be back. I am Laurel. My partner is Yanni. Up to mighty London came an Irish lad one day, as the streets were paved with gold, so everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand and Leicester Square, till Paddy got excited and he shouted to them, "It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye Piccadilly, farewell Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there." You know the song, sing it with us next time that chorus comes around. Paddy wrote a letter to his Irish Molly-O, saying, "If you don't receive this, write and let me know. If I make mistakes in spelling, Molly dear," says he, "remember it's the pen that's bad. Don't lay the blame on me." It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye Piccadilly, farewell Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. Molly wrote a neat reply to Irish Paddy-O, saying,
Mike Maloney wants to marry me, and so leave the Strand and Piccadilly, or you'll be to blame.
"For love has fairly drove me silly, hoping you're the same." It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye Piccadilly, farewell Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there. Thank you so much. It is a long Tipperary. It's about 3,000 miles exactly from here. The events of the First World War are 100 years in the past, and that's a long, long way too. Currently, and for the next few months, we're thinking a lot about the First World War and its place in history. Now, I have to admit that I didn't know what that song was about. How many of you just heard the verses to that song for the first time? Yeah. I had never heard them. I had no idea what it was about before I did the research for this presentation. It's a ubiquitous song, universally associated with the First World War, but most of us have never heard anything but the chorus. The song was first published in 1912 and was somewhat popular before the war. Early in the conflict, a Daily Mail correspondent reported hearing an Irish brigade singing the song as they marched through Bologna. Other units picked it up as a marching song, and then in 1914, a well-known pop singer named John McCormack recorded it, and the song became an international hit. Today, it's one of the most recognizable songs of the period and is as much a part of our collective heritage as Yankee Doodle, Dixie, Sweet Georgia Brown, or Jailhouse Rock. During the war, music tied the men on the battlefields to their families at home. It united people in their beliefs and inspired those who left home and family to fight. It also described certain aspects of the conflict. To listen to the popular and folk songs of the First World War is to hear the cultural history of the period brought vividly to life. Today, my colleague Dawn Yanni Indermuehle and I will present a number of songs from the English-speaking side of the First World War and give a little bit of background on the issues and events. As was the case with the first song, some of these pieces will be familiar to you. If you would like to sing along, please feel free to do so. Our only request, as usual, is that if you'd like to sing, please sing the same song that we're singing.
Our next song was composed very early in the war. It's noteworthy that the lyrics were written not only by an American long before America's entry into the war, but by a woman at a time when songwriting was still considered men's work. Lena Gilbert, or Gilbert Brown Ford, was living in London when she collaborated with composer Ivor Novello on this patriotic and touching song. Anglophiles, we're deep, knee-deep, I think we're throat-deep in Anglophile business this weekend, and fans of Downton Abbey will recognize the British stiff upper lip.
They were summoned from the hillside, they were called in from the glen, and the country found them ready at the stirring call for men. Let no tears add to their hardships as the soldiers pass along, and although your heart is breaking, make it sing this cheery song. Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning. Though your lads are far away, they dream of home. There's a silver lining through the dark clouds shining. Turn the dark cloud inside out till the boys come home. Overseas there came a pleading, help a nation in distress, and we gave our glorious laddies honor bade us do no less. For no gallant son of Britain to a tyrant's yoke shall bend, and no Englishman is silent to the sacred call of friend. Keep the home fires burning Though your lands are far away, they dream of home. There's a silver lining through the dark clouds shining. Turn the dark cloud inside out till the boys come home. Turn the dark cloud inside out till the boys come home.
Lena Ford, who wrote those lyrics, was from Pennsylvania. She was one of the first Americans to lose her life in the war when she and her son Walter were killed during a German air raid on London in March 1918.
So, how was it that in 1914 the British were keeping their home fires burning for their boys who had gone to war? The beginnings of the First World War are easily put into simple terms. On June 28th, 1914, the heir apparent to the throne of Austria-Hungary and his wife were assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. Austria-Hungary decided to use the assassination as justification for an attack on Serbia. On the 28th of July, just a month after the assassination, war was declared. Now, at that time, many of the nations of the world had treaties and agreements which bound them to assist their allies in the event of enemy action. So when the Austrians attacked Serbia, all of their allies were required by treaty to join in the fight. By the end of 1914, most of Europe was embroiled in a very, very ugly fight. Germany, Austria, and Hungary on one side, and France, the British Empire, Russia, and Belgium on the other. And as the time passed, more and more allies joined in until it was, in fact, a world war. When the powerful and dominant Germans marched through Belgium to attack France, England was required by treaty to defend their Belgian allies.
In 1915, a pair of English brothers wrote a lighthearted song to remind their countrymen and their enemies who the real tough guys were and to encourage them to sign up and do their part.
Private Perks is a funny little codger with a smile, a funny smile. 5 feet none, he's an artful little dodger with a smile, a funny smile. Flush or broke, he'll have his little joke. He can't be suppressed. All the other fellows have to grin when he gets this off his chest. Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, 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 while you Lucifer to light your flag. Smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. Private Perks went marching into Flanders with his smile, his funny smile. He was loved by the privates and commanders for his smile, his funny smile. When a throng of Boches came along with a mighty swing, Perks yells out, "This little bunch is mine. Keep your heads down, boys, and sing. Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, 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 while you Lucifer to light your flag. Smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. Private Perks came back from Bosch shooting with his smile, his funny smile. Round his home he then set about recruiting with his smile, his funny smile. He told all his pals, the short, the tall, what a time he'd had. And as each enlisted like a man, Private Perks said, now my lad, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While you've Lucifer to light your flag, smile, boys, that's the smile. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile.
The term Bosch was a commonly used derogatory name for a German soldier. You'll hear it again as we move forward. The realities of war were much different than the lighthearted antics of Private Perks and his mates. On the Western Front, a huge number of soldiers faced each other in a virtual stalemate. The sides were so evenly matched that neither was able to move the other.
They dug themselves into trenches from which forays were launched. In between the trenches, barbed wire fences were strung to discourage enemy attack. The barren, desolate, bomb and artillery-ravaged area in between took the name No Man's Land. Those who entered the divide were met with almost certain death from gunfire, artillery, grenades, and poison gas. Now, while this nightmare was taking place in Europe, the prevailing feeling in America was that we would remain uninvolved. In August 1914, President Wilson officially announced that the U.S. would maintain neutrality. There were, however, a number of influential and extremely vocal Americans, including former President Theodore Roosevelt, who were very much in favor of involvement.
In response to what they considered a dangerous movement to bring us into the war, two Tin Pan Alley songwriters wrote from a mother's perspective as they composed a pacifist plea, I can't even say the word today, pacifist plea, which became extremely popular throughout America.
You know, I've told you several times that we should never do these programs sober.
But it's a 2-hour drive and we're not allowed to drive here inebriated, so we don't.
Who made that law? Million soldiers to the war have gone, who may never return again. 10 million mothers' hearts must break for the ones who died in vain. Head bowed down in sorrow in her lonely years, I heard a mother murmur through her tears,
I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. Who dares to place a musket on his shoulder to shoot some other mother's darling boy? But nations arbitrate their future troubles. It's time to lay the sword and gun away. There'd be no war today if mothers all would say, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier.
What victory can cheer a mother's heart when she looks at her blighted home? What victory can bring her back all she
I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. Who dares to place a musket on his shoulder to shoot some other mother's darling boy? Let nations arbitrate their future troubles. It's time to lay the sword and gun away. There'd be no war today if mothers all would say, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. There'd be no war today
if mothers all would say,
I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. Thank you. I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier was not universally popular. Hawks in America didn't like it, and those opposing women having a say in such matters didn't like it. This is where I have such a hard time continuing. Those who opposed women having a say, as I said, didn't like it. Parodies abounded, including, I didn't raise my son to be a coward. I did not raise my girl to be a voter. You remember it's a 2-hour ride home. Strap you to the roof. Don't think I can't do it.
I know. I remember last week.
Yeah. And a humorous ditty with what we assume was a nod to Upton Sinclair's 1906 book, The Jungle. I did not raise my dog to be a sausage. Thank you.
The war continued and it became much worse. Our technology for killing each other had far outpaced our humanity. The technology of documenting war in photography, which Matthew Brady and his colleagues had used to show us the horrors of our Civil War, had made the transition to moving pictures, and the pictures were horrible to see. The widespread destruction of treasured cultural artifacts, architecture, and lives by the hundreds of thousands was unprecedented. Humanists began to hope that the horror and misery of this monstrous fight would make it mankind's last war ever, and that this one would truly end war for all time. 100 years and many, many wars later, the notion seems sadly pathetic and naive. In an effort to prevent trade into Germany, England set up a naval blockade. Vessels found it all but impossible to leave or enter German ports. To counter this, Germany turned to submarines. Significant technological advancements had made underwater vessels efficient, stealthy, fierce, and deadly weapons. Early in 1915, Germany declared a war zone around England, and U-boats began to attack vessels that entered, including merchant ships flying neutral flags. President Wilson warned Germany that there would be trouble if any American ships were harmed. On the 1st of May, 1915, the British ocean liner Lusitania departed New York for Liverpool with almost 2,000 people aboard. 6 days later, on a clear morning in the Irish Sea, a single torpedo launched from the German submarine U-20 penetrated her hull just below the waterline. The initial blast set off a violent explosion, second explosion, and it took approximately 18 minutes for the ship to sink. We've been doing this program now for about 18 minutes. That's how long it took. And I'm sure that felt endless to them as well, as this is probably feeling endless to these poor people here. In a horrifying scene reminiscent of the loss of the Titanic, just 3 years earlier, nearly 1,200 people perished. Most of the passengers were British or Canadian, but there were 128 Americans among the dead. There was an immediate outcry and a call for action. Germany
defended the sinking, saying that Lusitania was an auxiliary warship carrying tons of munitions through an openly declared war zone. The ship's manifest did include a significant amount of military cargo, much of it manufactured nearby in Bridgeport. According to the terms of the Hague Convention, Germany did, in fact, have the right to capture or destroy Lusitania. President Wilson could do nothing but impotently demand an apology, compensation for victims' families, and a promise that similar incidents would be avoided. Shortly afterwards, two American songwriters composed this song lamenting the loss and suggesting that Americans would be safer traveling aboard our own flag vessels. The nation is sad as can be. A message came over the sea. 1,000 or more who sailed from our shore have gone to eternity. The Statue of Liberty, I must now have a tear in her eye. I think it's a shame someone is to blame, but all we can do is just sigh. Some of us lost a true sweetheart. Some of us lost a dear dad. Some lost their mothers, sisters and brothers. Some lost the best friend they had. It's time they were stopping this warfare. If women and children must drown, many brave hearts went to sleep in the deep when the Lusitania went down. Lesson to all it should be when we feel like crossing the sea. American ships that sail from our slips are safer for you and me. A Yankee can go anywhere as long as Old Glory is there. Although they were warned, the warning they scorned, and now they must cry in despair. Lost a true sweetheart. Some of us lost a dear dad. Some lost their mothers, sisters and brothers. Some lost the best friend they had. It's time they were stopping this warfare. If women and children must drown, many brave hearts went to sleep in the deep when the Lusitania went down. Many brave hearts went to sleep in the deep when the Lusitania went down. Public outrage over the loss of American lives was substantial. Those who advocated entering the war became even more vocal, but in the presidential election of 1916, Woodrow Wilson, still advocating a peaceful settlement negotiated with American help, defeated a pro-war opponent.
Debate over our involvement was fierce. A large vocal pacifist lobby battled a strong preparedness movement, which had been inflamed by the Lusitania incident. As part of a set of compromises, America's military began to expand significantly, beginning preparations just in case.
In January 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, which had been suspended for a period of time. This posed an increased threat to American shipping. But the last straw came when German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a coded telegram to Mexican authorities with a proposal. He said that if Mexico would enter the war as their ally, Germany would, after the inevitable victory, see to it that Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona were returned to their rightful place as Mexican territory.
That blows my mind every time I hear it, and we do this program a lot. The Zimmerman telegram was intercepted and decoded by the British, who turned it over to us. The American public was outraged. Around that same time, 7 U.S. merchant ships were sunk by U-boats. President Wilson went to Congress to ask for a declaration of war. On April 6, 1917, America was officially on board.
It took no time at all for Tin Pan Alley to produce songs encouraging our patriotic fervor. Songwriter and entertainer George M. Cohan, already famous for Give My Regards to Broadway, The Yankee Doodle Boy, and You're a Grand Old Flag, wrote what is probably the most well-known song of the war. Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be prouder boys in line. Over there, over there, send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Johnny, show the Hun you're a son of a gun. Hoist the flag and let her fly. Yankee Doodle do or die. Pack your little kit, show your grit, do your bit. Yankees to the ranks, from the towns and the tanks. Make your mother proud of you, and the old red, white, and blue. Over there, over there, send the word over there. That the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming. The drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer. Send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there. Isn't it marvelous how that song, 100 years old, still has the ability to fill our hearts with those feelings?
It
It's
gives me
amazing.
goosebumps every time we do it.
Yep.
It's a little bit troubling to me, but it gives me goosebumps every time.
Something of a pacifist.
Except when it comes to you. America was in. Thousands of Yankee soldiers headed for Europe with the fresh, enthusiastic energy and can-do attitude expressed in that great song. American writers began to crank out songs by the hundreds to support our boys and the cause. Songs like I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier were supplanted by songs that expressed a completely different sentiment.
There's a million mothers knocking at the nation's door. A million mothers, yes, and there'll be millions more. And while within each mother's heart they pray, just hark what one brave mother has to say.
America, I raised a boy for you. America, you'll find her staunch and true. Place a gun upon his shoulder. He is ready to die or do. America, he is my only one, my hope, my pride and joy. But if I had another, he would march beside his brother. America, here's my boy.
There's a million mothers waiting by the fireside bright. A million mothers waiting for the call tonight. And while within each heart there'll be a tear. She will watch her boy go marching with a cheer.
America, I raised a boy for you. America, you'll find him staunch and true. Place a gun upon his shoulder. He is ready to die or do. America, he is my only one, my hope, my pride, my joy. But if I had another, he would march beside his brother. America, here's my boy. Yes, if I had another, he would march beside his brother. America, here's my boy. Just for the record, in case anyone was wondering, that was not written by a woman.
The tradition of using music as propaganda had been established long before the First World War. 100 generations of writers and more had composed songs glorifying our side and insulting the enemy. During the First World War, one such was a Canadian Army lieutenant named Graham Gitz, that's G-I-T-Z, Gitz Rice. Rice became well known as a soldier entertainer, organizing stage shows and concert parties to entertain troops near the front lines. So Gitz Rice was sort of like the Bob Hope of his day. His songs were very well known during and after the war. Here's Gitz Rice's song, "Keep Your Head Down, Fritzy Boy." Over in the trenches, up to their eyes in clay, Billy and Jack and Jimmy and Joe are singing all the day. When they see a German sticking up his snout, they give him a chance to get out of France. When they all shout, "Keep your head down, Fritzy boy. Keep your head down, Fritzy boy. Last night in the pale moonlight, I saw you, I saw you. You were fixing your barbed wire when we opened rapid fire. If you want to see a water in the waterland, keep your head down, Fritzy boy." Soon the Boche got wiser, hearing this every night. He sent us a bunch of rifle grenades to give us all a fright. But he couldn't stop us, we let out a roar. "We'll give you your fill of old Kaiser Bill and this darn war. Keep your head down, Fritzy boy. Keep your head down, Fritzy boy." Last night in the pale moonlight, I saw you, I saw you. You were fixing your barbed wire when we opened rapid fire. If you want to see a water in the waterland, keep your head down, Fritzy boy. If you want to see a water in the waterland, keep your head down, Fritzy boy.
I'm not sure why, but I always picture Mel Brooks when we do that song. So far, all the songs we presented today were written and composed by identifiable and mostly professional songwriters and lyricists. But World War I, like all wars, produced many songs that came into being anonymously, often from the ranks of the soldiers themselves. In World War I, those were called trench songs.
This next piece is our favorite of the trench songs. It was often used as a marching song and was, for reasons that will become obvious, was unpopular among the officers. Attempts to suppress it, however, were unsuccessful. If you want to find the general, I know where he is. I know where he is. I know where he is. If you want to find the general, I know where he is. He's pinning another another medal on his chest. I saw him pinning another medal on his chest. He was pinning another medal on his chest. If you want to find the colonel, I know where he is. I know where he is. I know where he is. If you want to find the colonel, I know where he is. Hey, he's sitting in comfort, stuffing his ruddy gob. I saw him, sitting in comfort, stuffing his ruddy gob. He was sitting in comfort, stuffing his ruddy gob. If you want to find the major, I know where he is. I know where he is. I know where he is. If you want to find the major, I know where he is. He's miles and miles and miles behind the line. I saw him, miles and miles and miles behind the line. He was miles and miles and miles behind the line. If you want to find the captain, I know where he is. I know where he is. I know where he is. If you want to find the captain, I know where he is. He's knocking off the adjutant's wife. I saw him knocking off the adjutant's wife. He was knocking off the adjutant's wife. If you want to find the sergeant, I know where he is. I know where he is. I know where he is. If you want to find the sergeant, I know where he is. He's drinking all the company's rum. I saw him drinking all the company's rum. He was drinking all the company's rum. And if you want to find the soldiers, I know where they are. I know where they are. I know where they are. If you want to find the soldiers, I know where they are. They're hanging on the old barbed wire. I saw them hanging on the old barbed wire. They were hanging on the old barbed wire. We were reminded by an esteemed musical and historian colleague of ours who was also a veteran of the Vietnam era that in the First World War, as in all wars, there were plenty of officers who met their end hanging on the old barbed wire as well. So, a good point made. Romance in wartime is inevitable. Far from their homes, gallant young men living at the edge of death encountered women whose lives were filled with turmoil and fear. They often turned to one another for love's comfort in dangerous times. Many romances that developed between soldiers and the women they encountered made memories that lasted for lifetimes. Numerous popular songs were inspired by these relationships. In marked contrast to the rowdy, racy trench songs, there were a number of very sensitive and charming, lovely numbers composed, including this one. She is watching by the poplars, Collinette with the sea blue eyes. She is watching and longing and waiting where the long white roadway lies, and a song stirs in the silence as the wind in the boughs above. She listens and starts and trembles. 'Tis the first little song love. Roses are shining in Picardy, in the hush of the silver dew. Roses are flowering in Picardy, but there's never a rose like you. And the roses will die with the summertime, and our roads may be far apart, but there's one rose that dies not in Picardy. 'Tis the rose that I keep in my heart. And the years fly on forever, till the shadows veil their skies. But he loves to hold her little hands and look in her sea blue eyes. And she sees the road by the poplars where they met in the bygone years, for the first little song of the roses is the last little song she hears. Roses are shining in Picardy, in the hush of the silver dew. Roses are flowering in Picardy, but there's never a rose like you. And the roses will die with the summertime, and our roads may be far apart, but there's one rose that dies not in Picardy. 'Tis the rose that I keep in my heart. So as we've gone through, you've heard what today the industry would refer to as sampling. You heard Swan Lake in the beginning of that. That was actually part of the song. And we've heard The Minstrel Boy and a minor version of Yankee Doodle. So the composers of the First World War really liked to sample songs and invoke other kinds of music and other eras. That song was written by a fellow named Fred Weatherly. You probably don't know his name, but you know his music. Weatherly wrote Danny Boy. Many of us have family connections to World War I. Here's mine. In April 1918, an American doctor was sent by the Red Cross from New York aboard the steamship Chicago to work at a hospital at Beauvais in French Picardy. While stationed there, the doctor kept a diary which included the following complaint. I am that unique individual in the history of this great war who up to date has had no thrilling experiences, barring air raids and Big Bertha. Big Bertha was the name given to heavy German siege guns, which were often heard from the hospital at Beauvais. That would have been more than enough as a thrilling experience for me. This feisty doctor, an 1893 medical school graduate, was my wife's great-grandmother, Jessie Weston Fisher. Her World War I diaries and letters are the subject of another of our programs.
Once America entered the war, her entertainers and writers actively carried on the business of raising morale and keeping it high. Tin Pan Alley's slogan at the time was, "Music is essential to win the war." In 1917, established hitmaker Irving Berlin was drafted and sent to Camp Upton in Yaphank, Long Island, to write songs in support of our cause. His patriotic tribute to the U.S. Army, called Yip Yip Yaphank, produced a number of well-known songs. I know, try not to laugh at that too. Produced a number of well-known songs, including God Bless America, as well as This Little Complaint Against a Universally Hated Military Routine, and this one became wildly popular.
The other day I chanced to meet a soldier friend of mine. He'd been in camp for several weeks and he was looking fine. His muscles had developed and his cheeks were rosy red. I asked him how he liked the life, and this is what he said. Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I love to remain in bed. For the hardest blow of all is to hear the bugler call. You've gotta get up, you've gotta get up, you've gotta get up this morning. Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find him dead. I'll amputate his reveille and step upon it heavily and spend the rest of my life in bed. A bugler in the army is the luckiest of men. He wakes the boys at 5 and then goes back to bed again. He doesn't have to blow again until the afternoon. If everything goes well with me, I'll be a bugler soon. Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I love to remain in bed. For the hardest blow of all is to hear the bugler call. You've gotta get up, you've gotta get up, you've gotta get up this morning. Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find him dead. I'll amputate his reveille and step upon it heavily and spend the rest of my life in bed. And then I'll get that other pup,
The guy who wakes the bugler up,
and spend the rest of my life in bed. And spend the rest of my life in bed.
I've heard that same thread against many a banjo player. So. That song was revived with a fresh introduction for World War II. America's entry into the conflict marked the beginning of the end. Americans were fresh, enthusiastic, and strong, and Germany and her allies, seeing no end in sight, were weary and losing heart. The balance in this war of attrition tipped heavily against the Germans, and at the end of 1918, an armistice was negotiated.
Fighting ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. On June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years and over 10 million military deaths. After the assassination which sparked the war, Germany's representatives signed the Treaty of Versailles and the war was finally over. But the music has continued. Over the years, many songwriters have found inspiration in the stories of that great and terrible war. Noteworthy modern songs about World War I include John McCutcheon's touching ballad, Christmas in the Trenches, about a famous unauthorized truce in 1914. Many of us first heard the exotic name Gallipoli in Eric Bogle's haunting song, And the Band Played Waltzing Matilda, about the terrible slaughter of young men from Australia and New Zealand after their landing at Suvla Bay in the Ottoman Empire. Eric Bogle's The Green Fields of France, also known as Willie McBride, is another wonderfully melancholy composition about the wars.
We've got one more song to present for you today. We want to thank you all for coming out on a sunny day when you could have been gardening or spending time with loved ones.
Worked out.
So the end of World War I was a time of great celebration. Lyricist Fleda Jan Brown teamed up with composer Peter DeRose to create this song to celebrate the peace. Thanks again for being here.
Now that the fighting is over,
Now that the war is done, through all the fears, heartaches and tears, there's been a victory won. The cannons have ceased loudly booming over the right or wrong. Now love rules the world with its banners unfurled. We will give a smiles now, all the world's at peace. Over the mountain of trouble, there lies a valley green. High up above is the kingdom of love, so peaceful and serene. And in each heart is a longing for liberty and bright. And out of the gloom of the great cannon's boom has come happiness and light. Skies are now bluer, sunshine more bright. Hearts will be truer in the new dawn's light. Homes will be brighter now that battles cease. Tears turn to smiles now, all the world's at peace. Tears turn to smiles now, all the world's at peace.
Thank you very much. Up to mighty London came an Irish lad one day, as the streets were paved with gold, so everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand and Leicester Square, till Paddy got excited and he shouted to them there. It's a long way to